to starting with new materials derived from seaweeds. So I was born in Firozabad. Firozabad is a city very close to Agra in Uttar Pradesh. And very early in my life, my love for materials started. My family was into the business of building products out of glass. So, bangles, yes, but there were chandeliers and everything else. Well, while I did not really get into the family business, but somewhere deep down, my love stayed. However, growing up, while everybody loves cricket, I did not. I waited for the ads to come in between innings. So I knew that, I want to pursue a career in advertising. And I continued my journey with journalism. But being a student of journalism, I realized that while marketing and journalism is nice, I reached a juncture in my life while I had a job waiting from Google. I also wanted to get into social sciences. But like all parents, when you have a job from Google, everybody said like, hey, why don't you give this a shot? And, you always have a chance to come back to social sciences later on. So I continued my journey. And like any Google employee, Google runs in your veins, right? So I spent quite a bit of time. I worked on developing new products, working on marketing, strategy, sales strategy. I did my bit. Like I have a tendency of working on new products and new development, so I made sure that I have that experience. And I continued my life. I had a very comfortable life because I knew that we don't have a problem because for everything else, someone's taking care of it, right? You hear about news that's coming from, about climate change and there's forest fires, but there is government, there are policy makers, someone is taking care of it, right? So after I moved on from Google, I had a bug to sort of do something and solve a problem. And to my eyes, what I thought was a big problem was not able to get a delivery. That was a big problem in 2012. So I started Fly By Night. Fly By Night was a midnight delivery startup that used to deliver when no one else would. And that's the arrogance of the youth. So I must get everything in 30 minutes. This is, before Blinkits and Zeptos. We started this company in the middle of the night, and it used to run between 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So it was like a 7-Eleven on wheels. It ran for 3 years. It was a little early for its time, so I went back to the corporate life. But then there was this urge of building something that was meaningful. So the closest that I could go to is let's make a difference in other people's lives. And I adopted a kitten. And that kitten became many kittens. And I was of an opinion that, yes, it's important to take care of the lives around you, but when no one else could, I thought there are people to take care of a lot of things, right? So there are researchers, there are governments, there are people sitting in the UN, there's a guy who's building something interesting with a drone. So I became this responsible resident. I would go for Warsaw cleanups. I would eat vegan food, take energy efficient cab services. I would compost, I would recycle, because finally what it meant was if you're a responsible consumer, you will have a greener planet. But then to my dismay, I realized as I started researching on this, that recycling works to a great extent, but it does not work with flexible waste. And even while I was actually trying to change things in my life, avoiding plastic waste, getting those jars, upcycling them, what came to what I understood out of that was that when you have alternatives don't come out of nowhere, right? You need resources. And when you're looking at resources, your glass is not efficient. Your cotton tote bags are not efficient if you're not maximizing the usage of that. And that's when my social experiment started, which is I refused to give out any waste for 8 whole months to understand really what happens to it. So typically what you would do is you would have waste and pick up every day where municipality is going to take it. But when municipality takes it, it's really going to a landfill. So if you live with the waste that you create, and I was living like an eco warrior, and this is what my room looked like in a 2 BHK in Bombay, which is not cheap, right? So you're actually creating a landfill of yourself. And that tells you a lot about what you are doing as a conscious consumer, even when you're trying to avoid it. So, from feeling that there was no problem and someone is going to take care of it, even as a conscious consumer, if you can't solve that problem, then you need to start thinking about who's really solving this problem. And as I started looking further and further, what I realized was that not just one problem is associated with waste, but many, many problems are associated with the resources that we take, right? We're using resources of the land, we're using resources and creating waste, and we're also depending on resources from land, which is creating a hungrier planet. So while you're looking at a material, what's important to understand is where is this material coming from, right? This material is going to be grown or is going to come from petroleum. I'm sorry about that. And when you're looking at responsible resources, you also have to look at what exactly are we creating it for. So you're looking at population, right, of 7.9 billion. You're also looking at biodiversity and millions of species that you need to cater to for these resources. So when you're creating a material like a fabric, a packaging, or a little bottle cap, you need to think about, is the resource that you're looking at scalable? Does it have a land and water impact? Is it causing carbon emissions? Does it have any impact on biodiversity? And is it fulfilling the socio-economic impact of that material? Right? So when you're looking at a resource, it's not just about moving to a bio-based resource or a petroleum resource. What you need to really look at is it fulfilling every attribute that we need to look at as a holistic system? So while I was looking at resources that could come from land, I realized there's an untapped opportunity, like typically a blue ocean opportunity in the world, and that is 70% of the planet's resources. And 50% of the oxygen that we breathe today comes from the ocean. So why are we not looking at that? And within the ocean grows seaweed. Now seaweed is an algae, is an organism just like fungi, but not a plant. It looks like a plant, but does not have root and shoot system. Now why was seaweed so fascinating and why I was completely in love with that is because seaweed does not require any land. Seaweed does not require a drop of fresh water, and it does not require any fertilizer, and yet it grows in 30 days. So in terms of resources, it does not come from petroleum, it does not require land, water, fertilizers, and every single time it grows in the ocean, it actually makes the oceans cooler, which means that the marine life that is currently dying, it's because of the carbonized water that we have left behind, it's actually improving every single time it grows. So little was left to sort of research further. I contacted the closest scientist to me, which was an ICT in Matunga. I found a marine scientist, and we started scouting for places all across India. I was determined to find a place where we can grow seaweed, where there was evidence of growing seaweed in Tamil Nadu, in Gujarat, but nobody was doing that in Maharashtra. So we went on, we found traces of seaweed that was growing naturally. We went into a village, and in that village, what we found was there were really old people, and there were very, very young people. And most of the people, like have migrated out of the villages. Within a cup of coffee, we got the entire village involved, and we told them that, can we grow seaweed here? Because of no opportunity and absolutely no fish left in the ocean, they agreed. Imagine within an hour, we made an entire village agree to this. And this is just 2 people team that is going in. It's not a government, team of government delegates who were walking into a village. A week later, we started planting seaweed in the ocean. The idea was that can you create a material which does not divert a resource to replace a material that is thrown within minutes, right? And it's important because this material that is thrown within minutes is going to live for another 400 years or even 1,000 years, depending on the kind of plastic that you're looking at. So you need a scalable resource that takes away the very quickly used and quickly discarded material into the ocean, into the landfills, into mismanaged environments. So since my search started in 2019, we had a pilot plant in Maharashtra. 2020 struck, and that's when we started thinking, what can we do inside of our houses while we can't go out in the ocean and plant the seaweed? So we found a small forgotten mill somewhere in West Bengal. We found this space, and this is like any other startup. This was our first prototype lab. It looked like that. It's not an actual shot of that. This is where we created our first seaweed plastic alternative. And this is the material that we created in 2021. It's a flexible film which looks like plastic. It's as stretchable, it's printable, in fact, beautifully printable. It's even edible. So if you were to eat it or a whale were to eat it by mistake, you'll be completely okay with that. It naturally biodegrades, composts. It does not require any industrial or any kind of environment. And if it ends up in the ocean, within days or weeks, it will break down depending on the climatic condition. So what I started out with was a material that is problematic, and we created a solution that anywhere it goes in, if it does not require human action, if it ends up in your belly, you'll be fine. If it ends up in the ocean, you'll be fine. If it ends up in a landfill, you'll be fine, right? The idea is to not divert resource and have a gentle chemistry so that the planet knows how to take the recourse. What we also found was this material has oxygen barrier. Now, why is this oxygen barrier important? If you've ever bought a chips packet, you would see that there is plastic and there is a metallic layer to that. And what that metallic layer does is gives a barrier. And it's a high oxygen barrier that you need. So while you're creating a material may look like plastic, but if it does not have the properties, then it's no good, right? And we noticed that there is an oxygen barrier, and it was important to sort of find its application in the real world. So when we found that, okay, we can solve the problems of application of the properties, we fixed the problem of the world, right? And we were like, okay, that's great, we've done it. And we were scaling with large companies, one of the largest companies in the world. We've been working with them. And when we started thinking about scale, we realized that we've not done enough. And there is a huge problem that we need to solve for. So without getting to technicalities, our process was something like making a pancake or a dosa. But what the industry wanted was something like that, right? So how do you scale dosa making to something which is extrusion-based, fast, and you're looking at throughputs which is in seconds. So our scientists came together and we started looking at, can you industrialize this process, right? So we started doing this in the labs. And then started creating a drop-in solution and a retrofitting solution that fits in the current use cases of manufacturing. Now, why that's important is while we talk about creating a plastic alternative, there is another side of the audience that says, what happens to the plastics industry, right? Because it is fulfilling so many jobs. One is the problem of employment that you're solving for. Another is the problem of infrastructure and capex that you're solving for, because you're creating a drop-in solution that goes into current plastic manufacturing industry and creates a material without displacing employment or infrastructure or even industries. Then is the problem of when you start scaling is, yes, you've created a drop-in, yes, you've created an application, yes, it works, but can it go fast? Because we want it to come out within seconds and not minutes. We also realized that this material has interesting properties which gives you a grease barrier. Now, why is that important, and why am I talking about these applications? It's important because every product that you have, which is in food disposables, right? We've moved from the black plastic to molded fiber packaging. But paper does not have any kind of barrier, right? Like if you take a printed paper or a print paper or a, or an A4 sheet that you'd have, if you put any kind of oil on that, you would see dispersion and a shadow forming almost immediately. The reason for that is paper does not have a barrier. Paper will absorb whatever is thrown on it. So when we use this film as a coating on top of that, it gives a very, very strong oil barrier, which is called a grease barrier, and extremely important in this application. Now, what is the problem are we really solving for the world? What we're solving for is the invisible plastic. Why is that important to understand? Is because when you take paper and you have a coating on top of it, you either have plastic sitting on it or you have some kind of PFAS coatings. Now, PFAS is a, simplest way I can say, it's a fluorine compound which is similar to your Teflon coatings. And Teflon coatings are highly mutagenic, highly carcinogenic, and most people now frown upon that. So it's given emergence to this new kind of greenwashing coatings called the aqueous coatings. Now these aqueous coatings are nothing but water-based plastics, just that they don't have polyethylene, which is what you relate with a plastic bag. It has another kind of plastic, which is acrylates. Now, if you've seen an acrylic sheet, you would not necessarily call it not plastic. So now, this is the material that sits on paper. Now, why it would create a problem in the end of life is because this material is inseparable from paper. And the repulpability of the paper goes down, the compostability of the paper goes down, and paper is not compostable because of these coatings. And when you don't have paper which is compostable or recoverable, you're basically ending the life of paper. First, you cut trees to create this paper, and then you make it unusable again and again. So that's the problem that we're solving for. The coating that we have created eliminates all these problems. So we've got pellets, which go into the making of the thin film, and then we have coatings. But then we heard this big news that was featuring all over the world, which was the Great Atlantic Sargassum Bloom. Just half a year ago, there was news on CNN and most of the world news that said that there is this really disgusting kind of algae that's taking over all the beaches of Florida and Miami, and this bloom is ranging all the way from Central America to Central Africa. And this sargassum is roughly 200 million tons of this material. Now, this is the kind of bloom that causes problem in the marine environment. While the rest of the world was talking about how it's become a big problem, and it's become a problem, just to sort of spend a little time on that, is because when you throw away fertilizer in the ocean, you're throwing NPK, right, which is your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. For growth of your plants. But because it goes into the ocean, the excess micronutrients gives rise to algae. And that's what you've seen in your lakes. So it's a human problem that's creating a marine imbalance. So while this was a problem for the world, it was an opportunity for us, because I am seeing that there is a biomass that's growing uncontrollably, which we can actually use as an input material and create paper. We've made this paper from the biomass that we derive, which is the waste of the biorefinery that we take in the making of the plastics. And whatever's left behind is what we use in the making of this paper. This paper is made without using any synthetic binders. So a little bit about paper as well. While the coating on the paper is problematic, the making of the paper is also problematic. And you guys come from print, right? Like, so paper is something that you would be in touch with very immediately. The sizing on the paper, the binders, you have cellulose, but how are you going to make that paper? You need to glue it together. For it to function well, you are going to size that paper. And most of these papers are sized almost to a 50%, which means that 50% of the paper that I hold, which is industrially used, requires glues, which are synthetic. So 50% of the paper that you thought was natural is not natural. We've created this paper by using the refuse of the land. We've also collaborated with a few startups which are very close to our heart. And some of the speakers are, probably be presenting that later in the day. We've taken the agricultural waste, which is actually choking the rest of North India most parts of the year. We've used that as a reinforcement material, mixed that with seaweed, and we've created this fantastic paper. Now, the quality of this paper is that it sizes the paper really well, which enhances the printability of the paper. And the texture is smoother compared to just agricultural materials. And quite recently, we created a plastic film, which is a seaweed-based plastic film. And this material was fed to the whale in Seattle Aquarium, a kilogram of that. It was a simulated environment, so no whales were harmed. And this material was also claimed as not just marine water safe, it was also claimed as marine life safe, which means if a turtle were to eat it, a whale were to eat it, if I were to eat it, or a 2-year-old child were to eat it, it would pass as food. So this is not an inert system. It will, your body will digest it just like food. This is my team. This is my R&D team that's cooking the materials on a day-to-day basis. So they are the innovators behind this. As a product, what you can imagine out of the materials that we create is we can create bags that carry stuff. There are films which are highly transparent, so you can see its application on Amar Chitrikatha, comic books, or you can even see that as a window box on your sandwich. Or you could see that as anything that requires transparency and protection. A lot of the interesting work that we're trying to do is in the industry of fashion, because every piece of clothing that you currently have comes wrapped in a plastic, in a flap bag. So we're replacing the flap bag for a lot of the fashion industry brands. And then, of course, the coating. So a lot of your molded fiber products, a lot of your burger boxes, pizza boxes, and cake boxes have this coating. So we're industrializing the process of actually taking this material to market. And then the paper, of course. Our goal is to go into commercial production in March 23. We are already preparing a production site in Pune, and that's why I've recently moved there as well. Yeah, thank you.
The floor is now open for Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can please ask.
Hi Neha, thank you so much. This is Professor Kirtiraj from IIT Roorkee. You talked about the film has very good oxygen barrier. How about the moisture?
So moisture barrier is not the property that we look at. Any material that has oxygen barrier does not necessarily have the strongest moisture barrier. So we focus on the oxygen and the oil barrier, not necessarily moisture barrier.
When we talk about the packaging stuff, we need two kind of barrier, that is moisture and the oxygen.
Correct.
And I'm concerned that because this is like most of the countries like China, South Korea, Japan, seaweed is edible. For example, in the sushi, which commonly used.
Yeah.
So how you see this edible stuff utilization in the packaging segment? Do you think this is the challenge, like the collection of the product or the collection of the raw materials, all these things?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question, because I should have mentioned that. So when we look at seaweed, we don't look at the sushi seaweed that you have typically eaten in a Japanese restaurant. We work with inedible species of seaweed. So while you're talking about cultivation, it's not coming from collection, it's actually coming from farms. And these are farms that are actually deployed in most parts of the world. If you just talk about Asia, then 95% of the cultivation of inedible seaweed happens in Asia. And the biggest countries that are actually doing production of seaweed are Indonesia, Philippines, China, of course, is the biggest player there. But there are really small countries that are actually numbering second and third in the production of seaweed. If I were to just give you an understanding of the amount of biomass that's growing uncontrollably, which is sargassum, we're talking about 200 million tons of that just in the Atlantic Ocean. So the biomass is an opportunity that we don't necessarily think is a problem, and especially because it does not displace your edible materials, which is not, we will never ever compete with food-based resources. The second question that you had asked, or the first question that you had asked, was around the moisture barrier. Now, while you create a material, right? Even the plastics that you currently have is not just PET or LDPE or BOPP. You have BOPP, PET, and you have a metallic layer to give the moisture barrier that the food industry requires. So when you start designing a material, what you're really looking at is what are the different kinds of bio-based resources you could use to put together this barrier. And every material should not be synthesized to solve that problem, because when you start synthesizing is basically, there is a structure that occurs in nature, and then you synthesize it to a different property, right? And when you start doing that, you're changing the biodegradability. There are a lot of interesting components that occur in nature, which are these compounds that you combine your material with, which does not harm the biodegradability of the material. Sure.
Hi, I'm Akshay Kanodia from TCPL Packaging. This is very interesting because we are actually working on a number of bio-based coating solutions for our food packaging as well as other plastic packaging requirements. I just wanted to understand about the production process and this production site that you're putting up now in Pune.
Right.
What is it exactly that you will be manufacturing there? I mean, we're talking about the granules, or we're talking about the plastic film?
Thank you for the question. So our goal is to be a material manufacturer and not really go into application development, but to take any product to market. We've realized that you have to not just showcase the production of granules, but you also have to showcase the production of films. So our core remains in the making of the pellets and the coating as a slurry, either as a pellet or as a slurry, but to effectively partner with people, we've realized that we may have to go a little further and establish the process of film production. So we will not have a film production that would be scaled up to that level, but we definitely will be showcasing the process. So if we were to, let's say, partner with you, we would love to sort of hand over the granules to you, and then you can take it forward. But if there is any understanding that we need to build to get this product, in the line, we're happy to sort of get involved. So we have an application development line, and we also have a pellet production. So largely a material manufacturer, not necessarily packaging manufacturer, because that, I believe, democratizes the entire industry, and we work better with the value chain.
Hi, Neha.
Hi.
What you presented sounds pretty revolutionary. So the question, I'm also going to talk about barriers, right? The question is that, what is your barrier? This is policy level stuff. I would think that this can go elsewhere. What is your barrier to really go to that height right now, as you see?
So I think when you're scaling up, especially something that is more biotech driven, policy, I think, definitely is a core part of it, which is understanding degradation cycles, right? When you're creating a material, you're not just creating a material which is not petroleum, you're also creating a material which is bio-based. But there is a lot of oversimplification that is done by brands because consumers don't have time, right? I do not want to give this speech and a presentation if you're standing in a supermarket. So how exactly do you start solving that problem? And that's a problem with policymakers need to look at. So a lot of material manufacturers and innovators across the world have come together, and Zerocircle is part of that, where we're defining what is plastic, right, and what is not plastic. While it may have the properties of the plastic, you need to really say, when you say it's plastic free, what do you really mean? It's like saying vegan and then calling milk. Right? It can get confusing for people. So how do you standardize something and the policy makers can make it simple for consumers, because brands and consumers don't necessarily have that time. So one is on the policy side, and the other barrier that we look at is the TRL levels, which is something that we talk about all the time, which is technology readiness level. Whenever you have a concept, and when I said that, hey, I found seaweed, I was at TRL level 0 in 2020 or 2019. But when I started scaling up and we created that little film, we were at TRL level 3. But for me to take it to TCPL, I would need to be at least TRL level 6 for them to look at that material, right? And when you start thinking about this will revolutionize the world, I need to be at a TRL level 9, and 9 is the final stop. So when we talk about barriers, it's about technology readiness level. And the barrier is to actually retrofit in existing manufacturing. And retrofitting requires a lot of patience and a lot of partnerships, because we can't solve all the problems, right? We're taking the seaweed, making into granules that can go into a drop-in line. But that drop-in line, someone needs to look at that and make that into packaging, right? How fast that's going, what is the technology required for that? It requires a lot of collaboration. If Zerocircle was an animal of its own, would be able to solve that problem, but that's not how you revolutionize a product. So it requires a lot of collaboration, and with which what we're really doing is we work with brands and then work backwards, because when you make noise, brands would listen, right? So the idea is that as consumers, and you say that I have a right to choose a better packaging, brands want to choose a better material when they work with their converters. Because brands don't make packaging, brands don't make materials, they make the product inside. So they need to work backwards. So that's when they start connecting us with the value chain, that the value chain may not necessarily be open to initially because it's a new material. Hey, why should I look at anything new when this is working just fine? So yeah, policy and partnerships.
Hi Neha, I'm Rabia. I run a brand design consultancy in Bombay, and I am just blown away by your presentation.
Thank you.
Just one question. Byproduct of seaweed, have you all looked at ink? Yeah, because that's, I mean, we are doing some amount of research in a very baby limited way compared to you, but ours is much more, well, it started like you, like what can we do to make a difference? And one of the things that we've been trying to find is alternatives for printing inks, right? And we have chanced upon the fact that algae is a really great source, and it is being developed in the West, California and in the UK. So have you looked at that?
There are actually startups in India that we are collaborated with that are working with not just algae inks, but microbial and bacterial inks. And in fact, some of the products that you saw snapshots of, the colors that we had used were those bio inks. So not just bio-based, but there were algae and microbial inks, and they're based in Pune as well. I'm happy to connect you to those. The way Zerocircle looks at that is, while we may not derive the pigment that comes from algae, because we got to focus, right? We've got 3 products and we need to industrialize that. So it would be interesting to take the pigment from the leftover algae. What our input is, how do we improve the chemistry of the ink itself? Because for the ink to stick to the paper, you require a binder. And can that binder come from algae? And that's something that we're working on.
So that was going to be my next question to you. We have been working with some printers in a very small scale, trying to develop a natural colorant for screen printing. And we are using completely organic, biodegradable pigments that come from Uttarakhand, all, you know. But we are having a problem with the binding.
Correct.
And when I saw your coating, I was quite intrigued, and maybe we'll have a chat afterwards.
Absolutely love to explore
But
that.
exceptional, I loved your presentation.
Thank you.
You're going to do a lot for our world.
So thank you so much, Ms. Neha, and now